Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Bush. I'm the CEO of Demand Driven Technologies and delighted to be hosting this webinar today about taking wholesale distribution to the next level. A couple comments here before we get started about the webinar environment. So first of all, we greatly appreciate your participation. What we do, though, is keep everyone on listen-only mode. It's improving audio quality and makes it easier for everyone to hear, and we avoid any potential interruptions that way. So you'll be on listen-only mode, but that doesn't mean we're not interested in your questions. So you'll notice on your webinar control panel that you can ask questions. So simply click on that little drop-down and you can enter as many questions as you want as we go through the webinar today. We always leave time at the end of the webinar to take questions and provide responses and try to answer as many of them as we can in the time available. Also want you to be aware that we do record these webinars and we make them available. We'll be sending you an email later today which will have copies of the presentations along with a link to the recording. So if you missed part of it or you came in late, trust that you'll be able to see and review the entire content. You can also share that link with other members of your organization who may have an interest if you find something of interest to you. And so it works out as a great environment for helping share the information and the good ideas that we'll be sharing with you here today. So from an agenda standpoint, our guest speaker is Howard Coleman. He's with MCA Associates and has spent his entire career in the wholesale distribution space. And he's got a very bright and insightful set of remarks about the future of inventory management and supply chain in the wholesale distribution environment that I think you'll find very informative and very much in line with the environment that you're seeing in your environment today. Following Howard's comments, what we're going to do is take a few minutes to overview the demand-driven MRP or DRP concepts that our solution is based on. It's an important aspect of what we do. It truly allows us to bring to life pull-based concepts in wholesale distribution and really allows clients to achieve the kind of performance improvements in their supply chain that they're looking for. We'll give you a short demonstration of Replenishment Plus, which also includes a stock deployment module which we use for hub and spoke and direct deploy environments to really simplify and improve the management of a range of regional distribution centers and things like that. Then we'll just take a minute to briefly review some analysis that we can provide for you to give you a better sense of the impact that our solution and the methodology could have in your environment, along with covering off any of the questions that you may have during the event. So remember, please make active use of that question panel on your webinar control environment. It'll allow us to really hit the mark in terms of your expectations and things that'll be on your mind as we wrap up the presentation today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Howard, who is going to share his remarks about the state of, excuse me, I'm just having some mouse control issues here. There we go. About his perspective on wholesale distribution and the strategies that can really help distributors going forward. So Howard, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. Can everyone see these slides?
We got them. Let's go.
Okay, fantastic. I passed the first technology test. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Eric, and particularly for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. You know, folks, this particular topic has fascinated me for some time now, both as a former supply chain manager and practitioner, and as well as over several years as a consultant. I've seen a real need for a solution that transforms the current thinking, the prevailing conventional wisdom that exists, and which I find is often embedded in the enterprise software that many wholesale distributors possess and utilize every day. So I'm particularly supportive of thinking differently, and I think that can foster a completely different perspective in terms of wholesale distribution, inventory, and supply chain management. Now, having said that, I think there is a strategic race for supply chain excellence. It's going on right now, and it's being used as a competitive weapon. The art and science of supply chain management has really matured rapidly, although I would think a little bit less or a little bit slower in wholesale distribution. But the timelines for adoption that I'm seeing are being accelerated. That is, there seems to be less patience just for incremental improvement. In my view, therefore, you should be aware of and understand as much as you can about some of the specifics that speak to this topic, and particularly listen closely to what the folks at Demand-Driven Technology have to say today. So before the folks from Demand-Driven Technologies begin addressing some of their meat on the bone, I'd like to address this topic, excuse me, within the context of the traditional wholesale distributor, product inventory ordering, and the intercompany inventory planning and replenishment schemes that are being employed, and touch upon some of the key challenges and I think pain points that I've routinely observed in my own practice, in which demand-driven technology seems to possess some very interesting solution methodology. Sales, or as we often call them, demand forecasts, tend to drive our supply chain management and inventory replenishment rationale, doesn't it? These forecasts drive the replenishment controls we have in place. They become mitigated by lead times and safety stock parameters, reorder quantity parameters, and all the rules surrounding those. In other words, they become the inventory drivers and often very much over-relied on. We all know that forecasts are subject to variance, particularly at the SKU level. And I suspect that some of us may have learned that pretty much the hard way. So we experienced, as a result, high inventory levels, low inventory turns, maybe it's less than desirable service levels, product at the wrong location, and we might conclude that they're faulty stocking strategies. These issues have not only an impact on the wholesale distributor, but also on our vendors, and maybe even the marketing and buying groups that they all may belong to or be associated with. Now, this last one may seem a little surprising to you, and I expect that demand-driven technologies will be addressing this today. Because over the years, there has been so much discussion about how wholesale distributors can collaborate with their suppliers and vice versa, going beyond the typical transactional nature of the business of buying and selling. But somehow the discussion, as much of it as there is, and at least as I've tracked and perceived it, always seems to end up reverting back to the middle. That is, one of disconnected silos, where we revert back to one of price and or rebate discussions among the wholesale distributors, the vendors, and again, even getting the specific marketing and buying groups involved. I know from my own experience working in several different verticals that wholesale distributors today, some are providing actual point of sale or order demand information to their suppliers, and they do it in real time. And by the way, they also get paid for it. It's kind of a win-win on both sides, as opposed to each attempting to optimize their own demand planning. So we should be trying, in my estimation, to find ways to provide to our vendors what I like to call anticipated buy signals, providing greater visibility to our supply chain partners and further developing an approach to collaboration. In other words, really building those relationships. Now, in our discussion today, you're going to be hearing the terms push and pull, two pretty simple words. But there is a difference between them. Push, I'll simply describe as replenishing our product to our distribution centers and warehouse pretty much based on forecast. Where pull says, we're going to use a different approach, one that replenishes product to our DCs and warehouses based on something that more clearly approximates actual demand. Interesting difference. So kind of put a pin in this one as it should become much clearer to you as we move along today. In fact, you might want to keep this picture in your mind's eye also. Put a pin in this one too, because we're employing some different thinking here. Pull, which we said reacts to current demand, versus push, which is heavily reliant on forecasts, always seems to raise some mind-bending questions and challenges to the conventional wisdom in inventory and supply chain management. And I can tell you, sometimes to the point of chronic conflict. So this is why I believe this picture is so valuable. To me, I've always said it's worth 1,000 words. Now on the right side, the pull side, you'll see that the inventory peaks are lower, the inventory lows are a bit higher, and the period, that is the time between replenishment cycles, is shorter. It's a very important difference. With pull, you have these shorter periods between replenishment, where on the push side, you'll see there are longer periods between replenishment. Push provides an opportunity, or more opportunity for stockouts. Why? Because the replenishment cycle is longer. The cycle now is more vulnerable to forecast variance. Where on the pull side, there's less opportunity for stockouts because of these shorter periods between replenishment cycles. In other words, we have an opportunity to react more quickly to forecast variances when it invariably occurs. Push typically results in higher average inventory levels. Pull typically results in lower average inventory levels. Now, if you happen to have a distribution network that looks something like this, a typical hub and spoke arrangement as your primary distribution network, then your objective should be to minimize the total inventory across that distribution network, but still be able to meet your desired service levels to end customers from each location. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and frankly, I know it's not all that easy to do sometimes, because here's what often happens. If we look at this particular slide, we see we have branches being serviced by a distribution center. Often, each of those are in their individual planning silos. So I think this introduces some very important facts of life to consider. And I think today is an opportunity where we can challenge them. Now, if we refer to this slide, the forecast number, which is the number to the left of the slash, and the actual demand, which is the number to the right of the slash, shows significant variance at each spoke. Although at the distribution center level, where the forecast is aggregated, the variance is much more acceptable. Now, surely it's a much messier situation at the branch or the spoke level. So I ask you now to consider this statement. The narrower the aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. Let me say it again. The narrower the aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. In other words, the question of how much you will consume of a product, for instance, from a distribution center, will typically provide a better answer to the question, how much product will you sell from one of the spokes? It's an absolute fact because it's a statistical truth. In practice, you may tend to address this truth by overcompensating with inventory, particularly at the spoke. And that's just where the forecast variance is highest. Now, this variance compensation is usually accomplished with safety stock and, of course, some risk in doing so. And, of course, from a service level perspective, there may also be a misallocation of inventory that results in inventory at the wrong place at the wrong time. So there is this tendency to push inventory throughout our supply chain based on a specific method you might be using to calculate forecast and the way you use or utilize your inventory drivers. Demand variability is often not recognized quickly or even communicated to the source of supply. Source of supply could be the distribution center or the vendor themselves. So all the players in the supply chain are often challenged by a whipsaw effect that might look something like this, where we are constantly reacting throughout the whole supply chain because we have this tendency to push inventory throughout the supply chain based on forecast. We know that demand variability, it seems, almost immediately occurs and takes over. It's not recognized quickly or even communicated to the source of supply. So again, we get this whipsaw effect. Now, I think there are good reasons for suppliers to think differently also, beyond their own local optimization issues. So what if we could apply these same pull principles, this pull thinking with your suppliers so that they are producing what their customer, that is you, need, rather than anticipating, forecasting, what they think you'll need, and have better control over their own production or supply capacity too. I think there's a real opportunity to get suppliers to think differently, which might lead to more frequent resupply to the whole supply chain, increasing the velocity of the product throughout the supply chain, reducing the forecast variation, and therefore reducing suppliers' lead times. Excuse me, folks. This new collaboration approach should begin around the discussion of what's called continuous flow, and you'll hear more about that today, and how we become more synchronous in the way we do business with each other. Sharing buy signals with your suppliers, fostering the opportunity to share data. Now, the possibility of some type of direct data connection with our suppliers to communicate these buy signals, I think is pretty intriguing, because there could be now a real aligned interest, and that could be a positive development and a real form of collaboration. So I think this picture kind of sums it up, and I simply call it the system logic. To me, it says it all in terms of what the stakes are in attending to supply chain management, its impact on cash, inventory cost, and customer service strategy, and emphasizes the challenges and some of those pain points I described, and as will further be described today as we go along. Your customer service policies, to a large extent, drive your inventory levels, and they in turn lead to specific operations, sourcing, buying, and replenishment strategies to support it all. Again, these all have to do with those challenges and the pain points we described earlier. So the bottom line is, I think, that this drives us, or should drive us, to be looking at our supply chain network, both in terms of total cost of inventory and the total cost of distribution. Eric?
Howard, thanks so much for your remarks. Greatly appreciated, and I think they really shed light on some very interesting dimensions here about our environment and the impact that we can have on wholesale distributors. So I'm going to jump over back to the presentation now and just provide a very brief update on the concepts about demand-driven MRP or DRP and so on. So just for a moment, who is DD Tech or Demand-Driven Technologies? Our company is based entirely around providing clients with tangible and sustainable results in their supply chain performance. And we've got a phenomenal track record in doing that with over 80 clients around the world. We see substantial improvements in order fill rates, ability to compress lead times, and obviously a reduction in inventory because we get away from the inherent issues of a forecast-driven model. We've done this with manufacturing and distribution elements of manufacturers. So we've seen the world from a number of different elements or segments, if you will, including even in healthcare and hospital supplies. And obviously, it's about getting better results out of our supply chain environment. We provide a few products. Replenishment Plus is our solution that is used across the world. It's a bolt-on solution and is compatible with every ERP system that's out there. We've integrated with SAP, JD Edwards, you name it, we've done it. We have a finite scheduling solution for manufacturers, which won't be of interest to the wholesale distributors as much, but it does form a key part of the demand-driven operating model that we support. And then we also have a NetSuite version of our replenishment software and are actually doing a webinar on that later this afternoon to help that audience see the benefits that they can gain through the use of that solution. So, you know, it's all about getting tangible and sustainable results. And these are the kind of achievement rates that we see with the clients that we've worked with around the world. Service levels in the 97 to 100% range are very, very achievable and very commonly made possible in the client environments we've worked with. For manufacturers, this is really more a manufacturing statement about lead time compression, but through the tactics of demand-driven MRP and DRP, we're able to compress their lead times, which enable lower inventory carrying levels, and obviously, more importantly, allow you to be more responsive to changes in market demand. This does have a factor in terms of how you design your distribution network, so there's an element there. But typically, when we see 80% reductions, it's going to be done in a manufacturing environment. And then inventory reductions as much as 20 to 45%. Typically, if we're at the lower end of this scale, it's because the company is growing rather rapidly, and inherently with that growth, they need some additional inventory to help out, but they're getting much more leverage from their inventory investment in that. And then as much as 45% or thereabouts, which obviously is a huge benefit in terms of reduction of working capital. And clearly there's a knock-on effect of that as well, for how much distribution space do we need, how many pallet positions, how many racks do we need in our distribution centers to support the inventory levels needed to support the actual demand in the market. The buffering concepts that we support really also reduce impacts of variation, and variation is the enemy of any supply chain. It's probably one of the most difficult aspects to deal with. The benefit of the buffering logic that we support is that it dampens that variation, making it easier to operate and manage. And then probably one of the biggest elements of this is really the easy and intuitive nature of the solution in terms of identifying true priorities, responding and dealing with actual demand instead of conflicting messages that MRP or DRP will often generate, and in a much quieter environment. We're planning in ranges, and the idea that approximately right is far better than precisely wrong. And we find that this really makes planning easier because we're not always driving to a safety stock number or something like that, getting much, much better results in the process. Again, we've proven this with clients around the world. This is just a quick view of all the different industry segments we've worked with, as well as the range of clients around the world. So what's the core issue that we're dealing with? It's really about the fact that the planning logic that is pretty much in play in most all companies around the world is based on the idea that if we have a good, clean forecast, then we'll know what we need to have on hand to be able to meet the market's requirements. That basic logic was designed back in the 1970s and has really not evolved since then. And as a result of that, we find our clients continually in this, what we call a bimodal distribution, or the better way to say it, the simpler way to say it is, we got too much of the wrong stuff and not enough of the right. Or as your CFO might say, how is it that we have all this inventory and we're still not shipping everything on time? And we've seen it through surveys we've done as well. Aberdeen Group had done surveys. They found that over 90% of their companies were seeing similar results. And frankly, as a result of this nervousness and the issues of technology that's really not kept pace with the times that we're living in, we find a phenomenal amount of companies out there that are using spreadsheets to manage their materials. They don't fundamentally trust the answers that come out of their ERP system, so they pull the data out, put them into spreadsheets, try to come up with their own safety stock rules or reorder point rules or whatnot in a quest to get to a better answer. And fundamentally, they end up very frustrated in that regard and not happy with the results that they're getting to. So what is it that's so different? As we were talking, as Howard was describing, we really promote a pull-based strategy by getting away from forecasts and the inherent inaccuracies. If you think about it, I would bet most of the wholesale distributors now are carrying, on this call, are carrying more SKUs than they were 3 or 5 years ago. So as a result of pressure in the market, we try to carry a broader mix of items, which makes it even that much more difficult to determine what the right inventory positions will be. And if we're trying to forecast in that environment, and at the same time we're forecasting over a longer horizon because we're sourcing materials from the Far East or wherever in the world, now we're in a very difficult situation where with more SKUs to forecast over a longer horizon, inevitably we're going to be less accurate than we were previously. And so the key is to shift to a true consumption-based model, a true pull-based model, no one would argue that a sales order is a more accurate representation of demand than a forecast would ever would be. So the question really becomes, if we're going to try to shift to a pull-based model, how do we ensure that we have the right stock on hand? And this is where the real simple and straightforward but beautiful logic of DDMRP really plays in. And it's all based on this concept of what we call in the DDMRP convention a buffer. A buffer is a commitment to hold inventory of a given item. And how we set up that buffer is designed to do a couple key things for us. First of all, the lead time, or usage over the lead time, becomes kind of the volume of stock that we need during the process of ordering. If we order from top of yellow, the material should arrive at bottom of yellow, and that's based on usage over the lead time. So if an item is being consumed at 10 per day, has a 10-day resupply lead time, our yellow zone would be 100 units tall. And the idea, again, is if we order at top of yellow, which is our order point, the material should arrive at bottom of yellow. Now, that's not always going to happen, right? Because lead times may not be achieved. We may find that consumption during that lead time is higher than planned. So we have to compensate for that, and we do that by setting up a red zone, which provides the protection against variation that, again, is the enemy of every supply chain. Each item will have its own uniquely sized red zone. And so this is done dynamically through the software and really becomes a much more intelligent way of setting, I'll call it your safety stock number, although it doesn't behave the same way as safety stock. But its principle is there to protect against variation. So the idea of the red zone is going to be adjusted based on the levels of variation we experience. That could be supplier variation, demand variation, or a little combination of the both. The final zone is called the green zone, and this is what we order on average. We order from top of yellow, we order to top of green. So oftentimes it's going to reflect a minimum order quantity. And as Howard remarked in his comments about the push-oriented model, we're going to sign up for large MOQs because we get a big discount, and we're going to try to sell that. Well, inherently that drags a lot more inventory into our environment. Fundamentally, that then exposes us to obsolete product, excess inventory levels, and a number of other problems. So the green zone is going to reflect those order policies, but the advantage in DDMRP is that we actually have a formula that helps us understand what our expected average inventory will be. It's all of the red zone plus half the size of the green zone. The red zone, again, is our protection for variation. The green zone reflects what we order on average. So if we take half of that, because that's where we're at on average, we should expect that all of red plus half of green is about where our average inventory will be. This is incredibly useful. If you try to figure this out in your DRP or MRP environment, you're going to have trouble coming up with a good, reliable figure. But in the DDMRP logic, this works extremely well, and we've proved this out over thousands of simulations that we've done for clients around the world. Now, that value is very important to understand, obviously, because from that I can determine my shelf space requirements, I can determine working capital requirements, and I also can understand, if I sign up for a large MOQ, what it's actually going to do to the inventory carrying levels. Because if I sign up with a much larger MOQ, then half of that value is going to go on top of my inventory, and that's something that I really need to be thinking about. The better way of going is, as Howard was describing, is in a pull environment where you have more frequent replenishment, smaller buys at each time, so that you are really aligning material to what's actually being consumed in the market. And this concept has worked incredibly well. And here's some examples of different clients around the world that have achieved benefits from this. In cosmetics, we have a client in France that's had phenomenal results on the distribution side of their business. As you see, improvements in service levels, better inventory leverage, better response times, all are kind of the key elements that you'll get from the implementation of a demand-driven concept in your supply chain. So with that, I'm going to shift over now and give you an introduction to Replenishment Plus, which is our cloud-based software to support both manufacturers and distributors. It's hosted in a solution called Microsoft Azure. So Microsoft runs our data centers for us. They are highly secure, available around the world, highly scalable, and really appropriate for any environment. Access is simply through a modern browser. And we've eliminated all right-click navigation as a first step towards making a truly easy-to-use touch-compatible device, especially for users out in the distribution center or who are working kind of in a mobile environment and not in a typical desk environment. What you see in the application here is the priorities for the planner. I'm signed in as Frank at the plant today, and so I can see my priorities. These are the priorities in red and yellow are items that are going to have resupply orders associated with them, and we can go to those here in a moment. Items in green, no action required, and over top of green, which is another dimension in our methodology, tells us when we've got excess supply or inventory commitments against a given item. This is something that you don't often see is kind of the other side of the curve, if you will, where we get to know exactly when we've got too much of a good thing. And this typically when we start a new implementation, given people have too much of the wrong and too little of the right, we'll see over half of their items in an over top of green standpoint, which means that they need to slow down ordering, look to cancel some orders, things like that, to really get to a much, much better position. Each of these tiles is active, so you can go directly to those items that are called out, the 3 items in this case that were in the critical priority. And you'll see the workbench here for those items, and we'll go through this in a moment. I just wanted to kind of illustrate how we can navigate from one screen to the next. We'll go ahead and open up the workbench for Frank to see all of his items and how they're set up in priority fashion here. So you'll see that we've prioritized first by buffer priority. So this reflects how deep is our net flow position. In other words, our planning position is in critical for these first few items, high for the next wave, and then medium for the following. Again, anything in red or yellow will have an order recommendation for that, and you can see those order values right here as we go through. Items in green or over top of green obviously are not going to have orders against them, and so we're not going to be taking action there. You'll notice that we have a spike indication, and this reflects that there are demand records against the item that are in the future that represent an extreme amount of demand, and we're going to include those when we do our planning today because we want to make sure that we're protecting the buffer. The whole point of a buffer is to maintain constant availability. That allows us to compress our lead times. That allows us to pace to actual demand in the market. If we can achieve that mission, then we can really let go of our dependence on forecasts. Not saying forecasts don't have a role to play. You may have seasonal items where forecasting will be very beneficial. You may be introducing new products where you need to start with some level of a forecast to get the system going. But at the end of the day, they're going to be used to size the buffer, not to determine actual supply order requirements. So our planning formula takes our on-hand quantity plus our open supply, and all those records here will be in blue. You'll see the purchase orders here coming in for this item. From that, we take the demand, which includes any current or past due demand, plus any future demand if it's considered a spike. That results in a available stock or net flow position. If that's below top of yellow, it's going to order up to top of green. And you can see that here in the ordering metrics that we've established. The screen allows you, as you navigate from one item to the next, to simply see those details that pertain to the item that you've picked. So you don't really have to drill down. It all pops up for you automatically. You can see just the supply orders, just the demand allocations. You can also see a trailing trend view of the buffer itself and its performance. You'll see that obviously the inventory line will bounce around as we go through time. This purple line represents our planning. That's normally going to be in the upper part of the yellow zone or up to top of green. If it goes above green, that means we're buying double to stay out of trouble, and we want to be able to monitor that so that we continue to ensure that we're really planning in a proper manner. The Properties tab shows key item master data. You'll notice this buffer profile. That's really the combination of the profile value that will determine the actual buffer zone. So instead of requiring each of you to determine the buffer zone sizes for each and every item, we connect items with their specific attributes, their lead time, their rate of usage, and the like. You can see this one is being consumed at 629 per day. And the buffer profile values, which then will generate what becomes the buffer sizes. And these help you understand, okay, here's the size of my green zone, here's how large my red zone is. It calculates my expected average inventory here, and I can see what my on-hand quantities are as well. This is expressed not just in units, but as well as in days coverage. A lot of people think in a days paradigm. And so this allows you to work in that manner as well. Once you're satisfied and you understand the order recommendation, you can simply click and approve the orders that make sense. So we'll go ahead and click a couple of these, and those will create pending orders that will then go back into your ERP system. And the idea here is that we're pulling data from your ERP system, typically on a maybe once, twice, maybe 3 times a day basis, doing our planning, and then sending the recommended orders back and integrating them back into the ERP. It's not a very complex environment to set up. Typically that interface can be established within a few weeks and tested, and it provides really the ability to then bolt on this demand-driven capability into ERP systems that fundamentally aren't designed to think and behave in this manner. You've also got some quick actions here that you can press. So if you want to approve all your orders in one keystroke, you've done your review through looking at the grid. Now everything will go to the green zone that we've submitted orders against. When we go back to our home screen and refresh that page, you'll see that all of our planning priorities have been satisfied, and we're good to go on that side of it. People find that their planning time goes down substantially because they don't have to chase and reconcile every forecast. They're really just looking to make sure that they understand the order recommendations that are being made. We've had clients report as much as a 30% productivity gain for their planners, and really what they do with that time is use it to go tackle the more difficult things that often get sacrificed in the quest to just get through basic reordering activities and the like. Again, these pending orders would go back to your ERP system, get processed and finalized out to your vendors and the like, and makes for a very simple and easy to follow process. I'm going to go ahead and cancel these so we can continue on with our demo. Okay, the next page we're going to go to then, just lost my mouse, is the alerts. And this is looking at the our buffers from the standpoint of inventory status. Remember, we talked about the need to keep the buffers constantly available. So we use these alerts to help us understand if and when there are cases where our buffers are being penetrated. This could happen because there was excess consumption during a period and our supplies haven't arrived yet. It could also happen because a supplier has come late. And so we need to understand and react to those situations. You can see we've got some stockouts. So stockouts are obviously things we never want to see occur. If they're in this current inventory alert, it means that they're either stocked out or they're stocked out with back order demand. Regardless, this should never happen, and we should obviously have tools to help us jump on top of this. So you'll see a red X here. This means that there's an overdue supply order note. And what that is an expediting tool that we have in the software that allows us to chase down, here it comes, the inventory that we're looking for. So let's say we've contacted this supplier and he says the shipment is arriving on Friday of this week. And Friday is the 15th, so we'll go ahead and process. Oh, I'm sorry, Friday's the 14th. We'll go ahead and process that. And that'll tell us that, in fact, that supply is coming in and will be available soon. We do this so that it's in the system. Now, if anybody's waiting for that material, they simply click on the link. They see that the supply is going to arrive tomorrow. They know that if they're waiting for that material to get it sent out because there's an overdue order or something like that, that they can handle it in that kind of manner. So the main portion of the alerts is really about prioritizing where do we do our follow-ups, where do I do our expedites. And it's not based on companies that have, or suppliers that have missed their due date. It's based on which of our buffers are the most deeply penetrated and where do we need to take corrective action immediately. You'll see on the alerts panel on the home screen here now that we've got one current supply order note and we've got one that's overdue. So clearly what we want to do is make sure that we clear all the reds and yellows on planning to green and have zeros here. And then we want equivalent numbers of items for those alerts that we're getting to be current supply order notes so that everyone has done the appropriate amount of follow-up and expedite against those actions that are required. So that's a real fast look, and obviously we'd love to spend more time with you to give you a more deep understanding of the functionality behind the application. There's one other piece though that we wanted to share with you today, and this is called the stock deployment module. And the concept here is as follows. If we're in a buffering environment, let's say we have a central DC in Chicago and we're feeding out to regional centers around the Midwest, a lot of companies are looking for the ability to do, to gain productivity through centralized planning and the like. And what this allows us to do is to do centralized planning of distribution out to forward buffered locations using those DDMRP rules. So let's take a case where we've got a certain amount of stock to ship out. We know the needs and we can see the needs of all those forward buffers, and we want to make sure that we distribute the materials that we do have in the best way possible. So we'll go to an example here, and you can see down in the screen below where we see each of the regions that we're feeding from FPE at the plant. And we can see that each of them have a different starting point. One of them is at top of green, this one's over top of green, so they're obviously not going to need any stock. And we have 3 locations that need resupply. And the way the logic works is that it fills up first to the red zone, then to the top of the yellow, and then to the top of the green. So we're going to make up a deployment to allow us to ensure that we distribute and adequately fair share this, if you will, to out to those 3 locations that need the additional stock. If, for example, FPE at the plant was a central warehouse that also serviced its own market, you can create a holdback value here, which allows you to ensure that some stock would remain to service local customers. And oftentimes you'll see this where companies have elected, they don't really have a hub and spoke, they have more of a network where each regional center will have some products that they're stocking on behalf of the network and others that they're stocking locally for their own client base. Obviously, the benefit here is we do this in an equitable manner. The fair share logic or the prioritized share logic does it based on buffer status, and it gives us a very simple and effective way of distributing those items that we have to roll out to the network in a meaningful manner. We can also support drop ship kind of modes of operation and other factors for those SKUs where it makes sense. Part of the deployment of the solution involves doing analysis with the client and a bit of network design to really ensure that we get the best leverage of the inventory to really drive the right kind of performance that we're looking for in our environment. There's reporting, there's a lot of other features. We don't really have the time to go into that kind of depth today, but I did want to give you a taste of the application and help you understand the kind of functionality that's out there. So with that, I'm going to switch over now and ask Brad on our team. Brad heads up our business development and our channel organization to provide you with kind of a view of the analysis that we use with clients to help them get a better understanding of how DDMRP will fit in their environment. Over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Eric. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly walk through some of our analysis offerings. As Eric mentioned, this is a great resource that we offer for folks that really want to get a feel for how DDMRP would work in their environment. So the objectives of this simulation that we run are really to provide clients perspective on how DDMRPs work for them. We like to take a year's worth of demand history, and we'll be able to tell you, using that year's worth of demand history, how your items would perform in a DDMRP environment in terms of projected inventory, service levels to your customers and for your production, as well as how many supply orders you would generate throughout the year and the size of those supply orders. So it's really intuitive in that it's kind of tough to imagine how this would work for yourself until you're able to see it with your own data, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Also, we can do some what-if analysis. So it helps us understand how your lead times, how your MOQs, et cetera, are actually impacting your stock, service levels, and inventory positions in your environment. So it's helpful in that manner as well. To do this, we only need a few simple points of data. Essentially, it's daily demand history over 12 months. We basically send a spreadsheet to folks, and then they're able to fill it out with either 5, 10, sometimes 1,000 items, just depending on what items you'd like to see. And we take daily demand history for 12 months on those items. Then we take a few key item master data points, such as lead time, MOQ, if that's applicable, the current or average inventory over that same time period, and then the cost, so that we can talk about the results in terms of value on your items. So this is a very easy process. Once we get the data, it usually takes us only a couple of days to turn it around and then we would kind of meet back with you and present it to you and kind of give you a look into the DDMRP world. We definitely use this data to go over some analysis to start to understand the variability patterns that your business has. This helps us understand really if it's a good fit for DDMRP for your environment. And then we look at item level detail. So we're able to go through at the item level and look at over the past year. Again, you can see at the top here how the DDMRP buffers, which Eric did a great job describing how they work, how they flex over time with actual demand in the marketplace. You can see I've got demand pulses or demand by day throughout the year here at the bottom. And then at the top, I can see my buffers flexing up and down, and then my black line is my on hand at the end of the day. So you can see that this item actually never stocks out throughout the year using DDMRP. And then on the left-hand side, we look at some of the results. So here's our current on-hand position. Here's our average on-hand position in the simulation. So we can see there's a reduction in inventory potentially here for this item. We also look at the service level, 100% based on days stocked out, how many supply orders we generate, and the average size of those supply orders. So again, at an item level, obviously clients know their own data, and it's helpful to kind of view it for the full year. And I think it will make a lot of sense once we kind of get data for your actual company. Here's another example of an item that has a little more batch demand throughout the year. So the point is that, for different item types, whether it's make or buy part has different variability settings, things like this, we're still able to show how DDMRP works for those items. And then lastly, an example of a seasonal item. You can see this has a lot of demand out here in the early part of the simulation, and then the buffer flexes up with that and then down throughout the year. So we look at these items at the individual level, as I've just shown, but then we also take this and we aggregate all the items together so that we can say, at a total level for all the items that we're simulating, what would be the results in terms of total inventory reduction or increase, and also total weighted average service level throughout the year of the simulation. Again, very powerful. If you're interested in this, we can certainly send you the template to fill out. It's quite easy. And yeah, with that, I'll turn it back over to Eric.
So Brad, if you could just leave your screen up there for a moment, I just want to comment on a couple things here. This is a good example. If you notice on the page there in the lower half of the graphic, you can see that this item has quite a bit of recurring demand that's within a certain range of volume, if you will. I can't read the scale there. It's about 10 to 20 or thereabouts. But then every now and then you see those large demand spikes that happen during the middle of the year, and a few of them in the earlier part of the year. Howard talked a bit about service policy, and this is a really important dimension to get a better understanding of, because we can, through the DDMRP logic, give you a much better understanding of which demands really are the ones that are causing you service level challenges. And oftentimes people try to, kind of have a one-size-fits-all set of rules in terms of how they're going to provide and commit service to their customers. They'll have a set of categories for their A customers, and then B and C. I don't often see it done around the certain SKUs though, because this is really where it gets to be important that you differentiate. All of those recurring demands in this view that are at the lower end of the spectrum should be able to service all the time, next day delivery, no problem, right, or shipment. Those that are the big ones, the spikes may be problematic. And if you chose to always ensure that you had enough inventory to carry even those large ones, then you're obviously going to be carrying a lot more inventory as a hedge against when is that demand actually going to come through. Whereas you could say we're going to set our service threshold that for orders up to 20 or 30 we'll satisfy with shipment the next day, we'll guarantee shipment the next day. Items above that, check with us, we'll quote you the lead time based on our stock. And it gives you a much more in-depth way of making these decisions and determining how to do that. The graphical nature of the application, the ability to see where those demand spikes happen, the tools within the methodology really give you a lot better grip on how best to differentiate and create service policies that make sense both to you and to the customers that you're supporting. So I thought that was a good example of where that might apply. And again, this is a free analysis that we offer to companies as a way of helping them get familiar with the logic that we promote. It gives them a view of their part activity or item activity that they may often have not seen before. And so it really helps kind of gain some better intuition about how the methodology will work. And obviously, from our side, it helps us learn and understand your environment better. And as we are very committed to ensuring we provide tangible results to clients, we want to make sure that there's a real positive gain for you to achieve before we take steps together down the path towards an implementation. It's also used as part of the implementation and deployment process as a way of ensuring that we really give you, the proper guidance and we set up your items correctly in the replenishment system. So with that, I'm going to switch over and take a look at the questions that came in during the webinar. We've only got a couple here so far today. First, there was a question from Rodrigo about being able to see the hub and spoke concept. I think we illustrated that with the stock deployment module. Obviously, Rodrigo, if you're still out there, we'd be happy to take you through a more in-depth demonstration of that. The second question was about downloading a presentation for subsequent review. You'll absolutely get a copy of the presentations. Today, we're going to distribute those at the end of the day to those who registered for the webinar. So with that, I'm going to just pause here for a moment and see if there's any other questions. Remember, you can use that question feature on your webinar control panel. And if you've got something to ask, you can do that right now. We'll give you just a minute to see if there's any further questions come in. Okay, I don't see any further questions coming in, so this is good. We appreciate your time and attention today. It's always good to have an on-time arrival, whether it's on a webinar or in an air flight. Again, we really appreciate it. We will be sending out copies of the presentations as well as a link to the webinar recording. And so thanks again for attending, and we look forward to working with you on your demand-driven journey. Thanks again to Howard Coleman for his gracious participation and bringing his expertise to the audience here today as well. So with that, we're going to adjourn. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.